When Frank Sinatra walked onto the Tonight Show stage that night, Johnny Carson had no idea he was about to witness the unraveling of an American legend. What happened in the next 17 minutes would never be fully broadcast again. The chairman of the board, the man who never showed weakness, was about to reveal a secret that would shatter everything America thought they knew about him. I see messages all the time in the comments section that some of you didn't realize you didn't subscribe. So, if you could do me a favor and double-check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's simple. It's the free thing that anybody that watches this show frequently can do to help us here. So, please do double-check if you've subscribed. And thank you so much, because you're on this journey with us, and I appreciate you for that. The studio lights at NBC Burbank burned at exactly 3,200 degrees Kelvin on the evening of May 25, 1977. Johnny Carson sat behind his famous desk, shuffling his note cards, preparing for what should have been a routine interview with an old friend. Frank Sinatra, the voice, the legend, the man who had defined American cool for 3 decades. But something felt different that night. Ed McMahon noticed it first. He'd been Johnny's sidekick for 15 years, and he could read the subtle shifts in the room like a sailor reads the wind. The way Frank's security detail positioned themselves backstage. The way Frank's personal assistant kept glancing at her watch. The way Frank himself sat motionless in the green room, staring at nothing, his famous blue eyes focused on something no one else could see. "Johnny," Ed whispered during the commercial break. "Something's off with Frank tonight." Johnny nodded. He'd felt it too. In all the years they'd known each other, through all the late-night poker games at the Sands, through all the Copa Room shows and Kennedy fundraisers, Johnny had never seen Frank Sinatra look scared. But tonight, sitting 30 feet away behind a curtain, waiting to walk onto the most watched television program in America, Frank Sinatra looked terrified. What Johnny didn't know was that 3 hours earlier, Frank had received a phone call that changed everything. A call from a hospital in Palm Springs. A call that confirmed his worst nightmare. And Frank had made a decision that no publicist, no manager, no friend could talk him out of. He was going to tell the truth. All of it. On live television. The audience of 387 people had no idea what was coming. Neither did the 12 million viewers watching from their living rooms across America. They expected Frank Sinatra to do what he always did. Sing a song. Tell some stories about the Rat Pack. Make Johnny laugh with tales of Dean Martin's drinking or Sammy Davis Jr.'s impressions. But the Frank Sinatra who walked through that curtain at 11:43 p.m. Pacific Time was not the man America thought they knew. And what he was about to reveal would change television history forever. But before we get to that devastating moment, you need to understand something about Frank Sinatra that most people never knew. Behind the swagger and the fedora, behind the tough guy persona and the mob connections rumors, Frank Sinatra was carrying a secret that had been slowly destroying him for 23 years. Ed McMahon's voice boomed across Studio One. "Ladies and gentlemen, he needs no introduction. The chairman of the board, Mr. Frank Sinatra." The band launched into "Come Fly With Me." The audience erupted. 387 people on their feet applauding before they'd even seen him. Frank pushed through the curtain, and Johnny Carson's smile faltered, because the man walking toward his desk looked nothing like the Frank Sinatra who had appeared on this show 42 times before. This Frank was thinner. His famous swagger was gone. The cocky grin that had charmed presidents and seduced movie stars was replaced by something Johnny had never seen on Frank's face before: vulnerability. Frank extended his hand. Johnny stood to shake it, and in that brief moment of contact, Johnny felt Frank's hand trembling. "Frank Sinatra, ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice steady, even as his mind raced with concern. "How are you, pal?" Frank settled into the guest chair. He adjusted his tie. He looked out at the audience, and when he spoke, his voice had a quality that made everyone in that studio lean forward. "Johnny," Frank said quietly, "I need to tell you something. And I need to tell America something, because I'm not sure I'm going to get another chance." The studio went silent. Not the kind of quiet that happens during a dramatic moment on a talk show. The kind of silence that happens when 387 strangers simultaneously realize they're about to witness something they'll never forget. Johnny's hand moved to the edge of his desk, his interviewer instincts screaming at him. Something was very wrong. "Of course, Frank. Whatever you need to say." Frank looked directly into camera 2, past the studio audience, past the crew, speaking to the 12 million people watching from their homes. "I'm dying." 3 words, just 3 words. But they hit Johnny Carson like a physical blow. The audience gasped. Several women in the front row started crying immediately. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, then sat back down, unsure what to do. And Johnny Carson, the man who had interviewed presidents and movie stars and criminals and heroes without ever losing his composure, felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes. But here's what nobody in that studio knew. What Frank was about to reveal wasn't just about his diagnosis. It was about a promise he'd broken, a woman he'd failed, and a secret he'd kept hidden since 1954 that would explain everything about who Frank Sinatra really was beneath the legend. "Lung cancer," Frank said, his voice steady now, as if saying it out loud had released something inside him. "Stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months. That was 5 months ago." Johnny couldn't speak. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles went white. "Frank, Johnny's voice cracked. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Frank smiled. That famous, crooked smile that had launched 1,000 magazine covers. But now it looked different. Sad, resigned. "Because I'm Frank Sinatra, Johnny, the chairman of the board. Old Blue Eyes. I'm not supposed to be weak. I'm not supposed to be scared. I'm supposed to be the guy who walks into any room and owns it. Who tells death to go to hell because I've got more songs to sing." He paused. The audience was completely silent. 12 million people leaning closer to their television sets. "But the truth is, I am scared. I'm terrified. And I need to tell you why." Johnny leaned forward. "Whatever you need to say, Frank. You say it." Frank looked down at his hands. Those famous hands that had held microphones in front of thousands of audiences. That had signed autographs for millions of fans. That had touched the faces of some of the most beautiful women in the world. "There was a woman," Frank said quietly. "Her name was Catherine." The name hung in the air like smoke. Johnny's brow furrowed. He'd known Frank for over 20 years. He'd heard stories about Ava Gardner, about Lauren Bacall, about Marilyn Monroe. He'd never heard Frank mention anyone named Catherine. 1954, Frank continued. "I was at the lowest point of my life. My career was dead. My marriage to Ava was falling apart. I'd been dropped by Columbia Records. MGM had terminated my contract. I was broke. I was washed up. I was 38 years old, and I genuinely believed my life was over. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't the Frank Sinatra they knew from movies and records. This was a man completely exposed. I was staying in a Fleabag hotel in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place where you paid by the week and the guy at the front desk didn't ask questions. I'd been drinking for 3 days straight, and on the fourth night, I decided I was done. Johnny's eyes widened. Several people in the audience gasped. I wrote letters to my kids, Nancy, Frank Jr., Tina. I told them I loved them. I told them I was sorry. And then I sat on the edge of that bed with a bottle of sleeping pills and a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I made my decision. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. What happened next saved Frank Sinatra's life. But what he did afterward haunted him for 23 years. And now, with death approaching, he was finally ready to confess. "There was a knock on my door," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper now. I ignored it. Another knock, louder. I figured it was the landlord wanting his money. I yelled at them to go away. He took a shaky breath. Then I heard a woman's voice, soft, patient. "Mr. Sinatra, I know you're in there. I know what you're thinking about doing, and I need you to open this door." Johnny was completely still, the entire studio hanging on every word. I don't know why I opened that door. Maybe I was curious. Maybe some part of me wanted to be saved. But I opened it. Frank's eyes glistened with tears. Standing there was this woman, maybe 30 years old, brown hair, simple dress. She was holding a tray with soup and bread. She looked at me with these kind eyes and she said, "Mr. Sinatra, I work in the diner across the street. I've watched you for 3 days. I know what despair looks like. My husband killed himself last year, and I couldn't save him. But maybe I can save you." The audience was openly crying now. Johnny wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. Her name was Catherine Brennan. She was a widow. She worked 2 jobs to support her little girl. She had no money. She had her own grief to carry, but she saw a stranger in pain and she decided to help. Frank's voice broke completely. She sat with me for 6 hours that night. She didn't lecture me. She didn't tell me I had so much to live for. She just sat there and listened while I cried, while I talked about all my failures, all my regrets. And when the sun came up, she made me promise her something. "What did she promise?" Johnny asked softly. "She made me promise that if I survived, if I got through this and made it back to the top, I would remember that success means nothing if you don't use it to help people who are suffering the way I was suffering that night." Frank looked directly at Johnny. I made that promise, and then I broke it. The betrayal Frank was about to admit shocked everyone in that studio, including Johnny Carson, who thought he knew everything about his old friend. But what came next revealed the real reason Frank Sinatra had come on The Tonight Show that night. 6 months after Catherine saved my life, Frank continued, I got the role in From Here to Eternity. Won the Oscar. My career exploded again, bigger than before. I had hit records, sold out concerts, movie deals. I became Frank Sinatra again. He paused, shame crossing his face. And I forgot about Catherine Brennan. Not completely. She was always there in the back of my mind. But I was busy. I was important. I told myself I'd reach out later. I'd send her money. I'd thank her properly when I had time. His voice hardened with self-disgust. 23 years. Johnny, 23 years, I told myself later. 23 years I let that woman who saved my life wonder if she'd mattered at all. Johnny was crying openly now. Frank. 3 hours ago, Frank said, his voice shaking, I got a phone call. Catherine Brennan died yesterday. Heart attack. She was 53 years old. She died in the same studio apartment she'd lived in for 30 years, working at the same diner, raising her daughter alone, never remarried, never stopped struggling. The weight of his words crushed everyone in that studio. And I did nothing. I had all the money in the world, all the power, all the connections, and I did nothing to help the woman who saved my life when she had nothing. Frank looked at the audience, at the camera, at America. That's why I came here tonight. Not just to tell you I'm dying, but to tell you that I spent 23 years being the biggest success and the biggest failure at the same time. Because what's the point of having everything if you forget the people who saved you when you had nothing? But Frank Sinatra wasn't finished. What he did next, in front of 12 million viewers, would become the most legendary moment in Tonight Show history, and it would change countless lives forever. Johnny Carson stood up from behind his desk, something he almost never did during interviews. He walked over to Frank and sat down next to him on the couch. Frank, Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, it's not too late. She's dead, Johnny. It's too late for Catherine, but it's not too late for her daughter. Frank looked at Johnny. Something flickered in those famous blue eyes. Hope. Maybe. Johnny turned to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Sinatra is one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. But tonight, he's showing us something even more important. He's showing us what real courage looks like. Admitting your failures, owning your regrets, and trying to make it right even when you think it's too late. Johnny looked at Frank. What was her daughter's name? Sarah Brennan. And where is she now? I don't know. The person who called me didn't know. Catherine's apartment is being cleared out. Sarah is probably making funeral arrangements. Johnny turned to his producer off camera. Fred, I need you to do something, right now. Get our research team. Get our contacts. Find Sarah Brennan, daughter of Catherine Brennan. Los Angeles area. Find her before this show ends. He looked back at Frank. You want to honor Catherine? We're going to do it right now. Live on television. The audience erupted in applause. But Frank was shaking his head. Johnny, you don't understand. There's no way to make up for 23 years of nothing. You're right, Johnny said firmly. There isn't. But that's not what we're doing. We're not erasing the past. We're honoring Catherine by making sure her daughter knows that her mother mattered, that her mother's kindness saved a life, and that life wants to spend whatever time it has left making sure Catherine Brennan is never forgotten. Frank stared at Johnny, this man who'd been his friend for 2 decades, this man who was turning a confession into a mission. How do we do that? Frank whispered. Johnny smiled. That famous Carson smile that had comforted America through scandals and tragedies and uncertain times. The same way you've done everything else in your life, Frank. With music, with passion, and with the biggest damn gesture you can make. What Frank Sinatra announced in the next 60 seconds sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. And what happened after the cameras stopped rolling became one of the most closely guarded secrets in Hollywood history. Until now. Johnny kept the show going while his team worked frantically behind the scenes. For 23 minutes, he and Frank talked about everything: the Rat Pack days, the Kennedy years, the mob rumors, the fights with journalists, the women, the music. But every few minutes, Johnny would glance off camera, looking for a signal from his producer. Finally, during a commercial break, Fred Dordova rushed to Johnny's desk. "We found her," he whispered urgently. "Sarah Brennan. She's home. She's willing to take a call. But Johnny, she doesn't know who Frank Sinatra is. She's not a fan. She has no idea her mother saved his life." Johnny looked at Frank. "You ready for this?" Frank's hands were shaking, but he nodded. When they came back from commercial, Johnny's expression had changed. Everyone in the studio could feel it. Something was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice serious, "we have someone on the phone. Her name is Sarah Brennan. She's the daughter of Catherine Brennan, and she's about to learn something about her mother that she never knew." Johnny picked up the phone on his desk. The studio speakers crackled to life. "Miss Brennan, this is Johnny Carson from The Tonight Show. Are you there?" A woman's voice came through, confused and hesitant. "Yes, I'm here. I don't understand. Why is The Tonight Show calling me? My mother just died yesterday. Is this some kind of joke?" Johnny's voice was gentle. "No joke, Sarah, and I'm deeply sorry for your loss. But there's someone here who needs to talk to you. Someone your mother helped a long time ago. Someone who wants you to know that your mother saved his life." He handed the phone to Frank. Frank Sinatra, the man who had performed for presidents and kings, who had sung in front of millions, was terrified to talk to this one woman. "Sarah?" His voice cracked. "My name is Frank Sinatra." Silence on the other end. "I know you probably don't know who I am, but your mother knew me. In 1954, I was at the lowest point of my life. I was ready to end it all. And your mother knocked on my hotel room door with a bowl of soup and saved my life." More silence, then a sound that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. Sarah Brennan was crying. "She never told me," Sarah whispered. "She never said anything about helping anyone famous. She just worked and took care of me and never complained." Frank's tears were flowing freely now. "Your mother was the bravest, kindest person I ever met, and I spent 23 years being too much of a coward to thank her properly. I can't fix that. I can't give you back one single day with your mother. But I can tell you that Catherine Brennan saved my life. And because of her, I got to make music that brought joy to millions of people. Every note I sang, every stage I walked onto, it was because of your mother." Sarah's voice was barely audible through her tears. She loved music. She used to sing while she cooked. She had the most beautiful voice. Frank's face transformed, an idea forming. "Sarah, I want to do something. Your mother worked 2 jobs her entire life. She struggled to give you everything you needed. She deserved better than that. So here's what I'm going to do." He looked at Johnny, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm establishing the Catherine Brennan Foundation, starting right now, with an initial endowment of $2 million. The studio audience gasped. This was 1977. $2 million was a fortune. The foundation will do 3 things. First, it will provide financial support to single mothers working multiple jobs to support their families. Second, it will fund suicide prevention programs in low-income communities. And third, It will pay for music education for children who can't afford it. Because your mother loved music, and she believed in saving lives, and she understood what it meant to struggle." Sarah was sobbing on the phone. "Mr. Sinatra, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just know that your mother mattered. She mattered more than any hit record I ever made, more than any award I ever won. She saved my life, and now I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making sure her legacy lives forever." The phone call ended. But what Frank did next, in the final minutes of that broadcast, became the most replayed television moment of 1977. And what happened to Sarah Brennan would prove that some promises, even 23 years late, can still change everything. Frank Sinatra stood up from the couch. He walked over to Doc Severinsen and the Tonight Show band. "Doc, you know, One for My Baby?" Doc nodded. "Let's do it, right now." Johnny started to protest. "Frank, you don't have to." But Frank held up his hand. "I need to do this, Johnny. For Catherine." The band began to play. That lonely, melancholy piano intro that every jazz fan recognized. And Frank Sinatra sang. He sang the song he'd recorded dozens of times over 30 years. But this time was different. This time, every note carried the weight of regret. Every lyric was a confession. Every phrase was a prayer. His voice cracked on certain lines. He missed notes he'd never missed before. His breathing was labored from the cancer eating away at his lungs. But it was the most honest performance of his entire career. The studio audience sat in complete silence. No one applauded between verses. No one moved. They were witnessing something sacred. The death of a legend and the birth of something true. When Frank sang the final line, "So, set 'em up, Joe. I got a little story you ought to know." His voice broke completely. He stood there on that stage, microphone in hand, tears streaming down his face. The audience rose as one, not applauding, just standing in respect, in grief, in recognition of a man finally telling the truth. Johnny walked over to Frank. He put his arm around his friend's shoulders. And in front of 12 million viewers, these two legends held each other while Frank Sinatra cried. "Thank you," Frank whispered to Johnny. "Thank you for letting me do this. Thank you for trusting me with your truth," Johnny whispered back. The cameras captured it all. The tears, the embrace, the brokenness. And America watched in stunned silence as Frank Sinatra showed them something they'd never seen before. Humanity. The show ended. But the story was far from over, because what happened in the weeks and months after that broadcast proved that confession, even late confession, has the power to change lives in ways no one could have predicted. The next morning, NBC's switchboard was overwhelmed. 50,000 calls, people donating, people sharing stories. Television critics called it the most important broadcast moment ever. Frank Sinatra died May 14, 1998 at 82, 21 years after that night. The Catherine Brennan Foundation distributed $40 million, helping 18,000 families. Sarah became director, devoting her life to her mother's legacy. Every year, Frank called Sarah. They talked about Catherine and redemption. Johnny attended Frank's funeral, his eulogy. Frank spent half his life becoming a legend, the other half learning to be human, but Johnny never told anyone publicly. That night, he promised himself, never let a night pass without telling people who mattered that they mattered. For 14 more years, Johnny kept that promise. He featured ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because Frank Sinatra's confession didn't just change Frank's life. It changed everyone who witnessed it. That Tonight Show episode is now one of the most important moments in television history, studied in film schools and therapy sessions. But the real lesson isn't about Frank Sinatra. It's about Catherine Brennan, a diner waitress who saw a stranger in pain and helped. She didn't know he was famous. She helped because he needed help. That one act saved a life that touched millions. Sarah Brennan runs the foundation today at 71. When people ask what her mother would think, she says, "My mother believed every life mattered, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones." Frank forgot that lesson for 23 years, but spent 21 years making sure no one else did. If you're thinking about someone who saved your life, someone you never thanked, don't wait. Call them today. Time runs out. Even for legends. Frank learned that lesson. Will you learn it before it's too late? Drop your location in the comments. Tell me about someone who saved your life. Hit subscribe. Share this video. Choose today. Honor the people who saved you before it's too late.